I don't know how many of you are thinking about Christmas stories yet, although we're going to start Christmas sales here pretty soon. But I've been thinking about the Christmas story in the Bible. And it's really interesting because there's an aspect of it that's always captured my imagination. And that is, it talks about the fact that there were these people who were in the East, and they were, depending upon how you interpret what it says, they were considered wise ones, or the Magi, or people from a mystery school possibly, spiritual scholars. And I imagine these people. I imagine them sitting in their dusty libraries. I imagine them looking over their scrolls and their charts. And I imagine them having conversations, these great, rich, deep spiritual conversations, and these ideas, and poring over the documentation and having discussions and arguments about spiritual and religious ideas. And then, according to the biblical story, a star appeared. And suddenly it captured their imagination. And I imagine these guys with their scrolls and their books and everything, and they jump up from all that dust and all those cobwebs, and they run out and they jump on their camels, or they jump on their mules, or they jump on their Harley Davidson or whatever they had, and they started to go to this place where the star was. And I imagine as they were going out the door, I imagine people saying, what are you so excited about? And those wise ones, those ones from the East, said, I have no idea, but there's a star. There's a star out there, and we want to find out what it is. And I imagine them, you see, I can do this because I'm a metaphysician. I can do whatever I want with the story. I can imagine whatever I want. And I imagine that they didn't even really know what they were following. They just felt that there was something spectacular out there. There was a mystery out there. There was something that grabbed their imagination. And I imagine that as people went out the door, there was no conversation in terms of what it was. There was no opinion. There was no disagreement. There was just, let's go find it. I was reminded of this because last week I was at Johnny Appleseed Days here in town, and we were out there, promoting our center. And I had spent the whole summer at the farmer's market and doing the same type of thing. And it's really great because you meet people in the public and you have conversations. And you have these wonderful conversations with people that you don't necessarily know within your own spiritual community. These conversations about spiritual ideas and religious ideas. And last week, in fact, I think it was on Sunday, I was in the booth and someone came by, and we have this prayer book that we have produced. And most of you who are around here a lot, you know this. We have it in the social hall. And so there was a woman who came, and she and I were talking, and she had some questions, and she was asking about our philosophy, having this great spiritual conversation. And it was a conversation where we both kind of shared our religious backgrounds, and there were some things we agreed upon and disagreed about, and we asked each other questions, and she was asking me a lot of questions. And she had picked up this book. And I was thinking about the conversations we had, and they're very much from that place of, the journeys that we've traveled, the places that we've been, the things that we've been turned on to, the things that we've discovered, the ideas that we've discovered in this world that we either agree with or we disagree with or whatever it is. And she was holding a child who was probably about a toddler's age, I would guess. The child could walk and everything, but she was kind of holding him, and he was being very nice, and he was kind of sitting there listening to us, looking at us. And she had this book, and she had picked it up, and we had talked about it, and we'd even had some interesting conversations about the book because there's different ways that people can step into praying, and why is it that we embrace the type of prayer that we do, and why is it that other religions embrace the prayer that they embrace. Very kind of, spiritual, intellectual kind of conversation, very polite, very interesting. But see, on the front of this, there is this picture that we have chosen. And this is a picture that was produced by Marcy Minnan here. And if you ever look at it, if you ever pick this up and look at it, it started out as a photograph, and then she did some work online with it and turned it into a very energetic piece. And so She was standing there, and she had like the child in this hand, and she was kind of talking like this with the book. And suddenly, this picture caught his attention. And this is the most animated he was. He leaned forward and he put his hand on this picture. And he poked at the picture. And at one point, it was almost like he tried to grab the picture. And I stood there for a moment, and I realized, and I saw this, and I realized what was going on, and I thought, God, that is so beautiful. That is so magical. That this person who has just come into the world, with all these ideas about religion and spirituality and who's right and who's wrong and ego and all that sort of thing, and reading the books and the conversation and watching the movies and calling ourselves things. Am I this? Am I that? Naming ourselves for some religion. And all this kid knew was, wow, that's a pretty cool picture. And it made me think of the idea that the place that we all began, that was so exciting for each and every one of us. Do you remember that? Do you remember a time when you were a kid when somebody showed you a work of art? Or maybe you found a path in the woods, or you saw a sunset, and you became so excited, or you manifested or manufactured some sort of question in your own mind. Or maybe there was a magazine or a book, I'm dating myself because now everything is electronic, but a magazine or a book that was laying around, and suddenly you were excited. And you had no idea why. And I remember in my life, there's been a couple of times like that when I was younger. I remember growing up, I grew up in rural Northern California, way up in the middle of nowhere. And for some reason, I have no idea why, because I was too young and it was none of my business. But the school I was in planned this big field trip to San Francisco. And I think we were in San Francisco for 2 or 3 days. I was in a very tiny school at that time. They took the whole school down there. And I remember being taken to some of the museums in San Francisco. I remember going to some sort of a wood carver in Marin County. And I was so excited. I was just beside myself in terms of running around those museums and watching that person carve and going to Chinatown and actually standing and seeing the Golden Gate Bridge. And I had no idea why I was excited. It's like, why are you excited? I don't know. But what I know is, and what I've come to know is that these things represent sheer possibility. They open us up to another way of thinking. They open us up to another way of standing in the world. It's what some people refer to as a spiritual experience. Something that absolutely turns us on enough to where we begin to go in a completely different direction. I remember that as a kid, when I returned from that field trip, even going back to the place that I had lived, in this isolated place, the world never looked the same. And I went out into my world and I tried to discover those things, tried to discover variations of what I'd seen in those museums, what I'd seen in the zoo, what I'd seen with that bridge, what I'd seen with that wood carver, what I had seen. It touched something within me that I knew that there was a greater possibility out there. And I remember another time I was a young teenager and I discovered a particular kind of book, and I was raised in a religion and I was beginning to really question that religion. I was beginning to pull away from that religion. And by questioning the religion and pulling away, I sort of created this void in my life. And I discovered a book. And it was a paperback book, and it was very philosophical and very spiritual and very Eastern. And I grabbed a hold of that book and I read it. And I remember buying it. The school I was in, the high school I was in, had a book sale in the library to raise money, and I bought this book. And I remember reading it, and I put it in my back pocket, and I carried it in my back pocket for weeks. And I read and reread and reread and reread, and every chance I got, I pulled it out. And I was kind of walking around with this kind of sappy smile on my face and kind of wandering around out there. And anyone who came around me said, well, you know, what's wrong with you? Well, I don't know. I'm just excited. I got this book. What's the book mean? I have no idea. I don't know what it means. But it's the idea of a journey. The idea of something new. In the East is where the sun comes up. The East, we associate with the East spiritually. We associate the ancient libraries, the mystic schools, the old scrolls, the conversations, the wonder. And that's where very often pilgrimages begin, where journeys begin. And they begin with this place of feeling excited. Wayne Kritzberg says, we ask the question, what did that kid see at Johnny Appleseed days? And a gentleman by the name of Wayne Kritzberg would say, when I live consciously, I experience the majesty of life. I love that, the majesty of life. I see the different shades of color and different shapes in nature, particular qualities of light. Everything is sharper, clearer, more delicious. And see, that's what grabs a hold of us, is that deliciousness of life, that wonder of life. This week I got turned on to something. This is very cerebral, okay? And so I'm trying to take something very cerebral and bring it into where we live. So we asked the question, so let me start off with the question. Why is it that for each and every one of us, we start in this place of wonder? Something that turns us on, something that gives us a buzz, something that grabs our attention, and we don't even know what it is. That when it comes to analyzing it, it is the metaphorical shiny object that grabs our attention. Why is it that this is a universal idea? Doesn't matter what culture you're from, doesn't matter how old the cultures are. Doesn't matter what part of the world you are, it doesn't matter if you're a woman, if you're a man, doesn't matter what color you are. We all have this in common. There are things that grab our imagination. There are things that cause us to see things differently. There are things that excite us. So I found this thing called the anthropic principle. This is the cerebral part. If you go into the world of physics and you go into the world of philosophy, you see a lot of people who sit around thinking, cooking up ideas to try and say, is this basically the law of the universe? In physics, anytime, whether it's whatever idea it is, that when they say physicists are trying to pull the mask off the face of God, and so whatever principle that physicists have, and they try and match it up with mathematics in terms of the way the world was created, in terms of how it came forward through evolution, down through the ages, and so they come up with principles, and sometimes they cross over into a little bit of philosophy. The anthropic principle is very complicated. If you go online, you're going to download about 40 pages of this stuff, and so I've distilled it down into 2 sentences. Because I'm a small bite kind of guy. This is all I could handle, okay? So this is the anthropic principle. The anthropic principle says, it must be possible to observe the universe. Hence, The laws and contents of the universe must accommodate that possibility. So what's that mean? Here's the question. Are observers necessary to bring the universe into being? Wow. I want you to think about that. In other words, in order to bring this universe forward as we know it, this world, to evolve the way it was, what this principle says is, would that be possible if it were not dialed in somewhere in consciousness to have the observer? Because without the observer, you can't have the observed, and without the observed, you can't have the observer. That is some heavy stuff, man. That's really heavy. I mean, we in metaphysics, Ernest Holmes and people like that who brought forward our philosophy, they said, basically they said, in terms of the idea of freedom that exists within everything, Ernest Holmes would say, okay, there's this incredible power of creation. There's this incredible power that moves forward through each and every one of us. And so this power that comes from this place called God, this energy called God, this intelligence called God, this creative force called God, said we're going to throw this power out and see what it does. Because God basically, in essence, said, I will know myself better through how you create with this. This is this principle. This idea that what brings this universe forward is the way that we get turned on by it. It's our observations. It is what we expect to see. It is the shiny object. And so the little kid who was in the arms of the woman with the prayer book last week, he was the anthropic principle. The wise ones in the biblical account who saw the star, they are the anthropic principle. Basically this idea, there is something out there, and I want to figure out what it is. The East is the beginning of our journey. The East is that place where one day we find ourselves walking into a church, picking up a book, having a conversation. The East is that place where maybe we've gone through a divorce, or maybe we've lost a job, or maybe somebody has passed away, or maybe a child is born, or a grandchild is born. And one day we get up and we say, there must be something more. I wonder what's out there. The East is a place of restlessness. The East is a place of walking into a grand library and having your breath taken away. I went to college in the pre-internet computer thing, and I remember the day, I was someone who was never, I never saw myself going to college, my grades, high school, that disaster, okay? And that disastrous experiment called high school, And I went to a community college, and I got turned on to education there. And I remember the first time I walked into my university's library, and my breath was taken away. Looking at all those volumes, looking at all that wisdom, all that knowledge, looking at the paintings on the wall, looking at the people under the lights reading things. I remember in the library was divided up into departments. The anthropology library, the law library, the social work library. I was just completely taken away by that. So for most of us, that was a time when we were kids. And I was thinking this week about that little toddler in that woman's arms, and I was thinking about his life. I was thinking about what Johnny Appleseed Days was for him. I was thinking about what every day was for him to wake up at that age. Everything is new. The puppy licking its face is new. The picture on the prayer book is new. The grass is new. Christmas is going to be new. Johnny Appleseed Days was new. Mom is new. Toys are new. Sidewalk is new. Everything's new. And so we get turned on by everything. And I began to think about myself and knowing that at least in this physical life, this particular go-round for me, I'm not in that place anymore. I've been in this world for several decades. I have a routine. I get up. I live my life. I have begun to put together a belief system. I have someone I love very much who I share my life with. I have a home. I have children. I have a car. And so how does this live with us? There's a writer by the name of John Lee who I have a great appreciation for. And first of all, before I get to him, let me start with something else. I was reading this week a little bit of Thich Nhat Hanh, who is the Buddhist Lama sort of person, okay? And Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about waking up in the morning and saying, wow, I have a brand new 24 hours. I have 24 hours. And what's this 24 hours going to be? What's going to open up for me? Thich Nhat Hanh says, to get up in the morning and to look at pure potentiality and pure possibility. So that's what Thich Nhat Hanh would say. He would say no matter what age you are, you can enter into that day from the standpoint of the toddler. You can go have the puppy lick your face, or you know what? You could get really creative and you could lick the puppy's face, okay? You could feed the birds or have them feed you, You could have dinner for breakfast and breakfast for dinner, okay? You can make whatever you want in that 24 hours in terms of grabbing a hold of something that gives you a buzz, that turns you on. Now, John Lee says, now, in this time of a world filled with distractions, we are called as individuals to search out our truest center, the spiritual focal point of our bodies and souls. From this discovered center, we honor what is truly important, love in all its expressions. And John Lee goes on in sort of an affirmative kind of way. He says, today, my vision fresh, I'll wander within. He says, I will wander within. There I'll see wonder and opportunity in every peak and valley I've discovered. Truly discover. What I love about John Lee is because John Lee says to us as adults, and I think most of us in this room are adults, whatever happened to us wandering? You ever thought about that? That kid at Johnny Appleseed Days, he did not intentionally come up to pick up a prayer book and have a conversation. He was just kind of wandering around and discovered the prayer book. You see, with him, the world is a place of wandering. We think so often in our lives, especially as adults, we think of things like, I must take the journey. I must take the path. I must read the book. I must pray. I must meditate. I must learn. I must pay my bills. I must show up. Whatever happened to wandering? Because I think that if we go back to those wise guys who came from the east looking for the star, I think there was an awful lot of wandering going on. Because I don't think they had a map. I don't think they had a GPS. I don't think that they had any idea where it was or what it was over, and they went out and they wandered. And what Thich Nhat Hanh is basically saying is, why not get up and wander into 24 hours? and see where it takes us. Because there may be something there that really turns us on. Charles Fillmore, who is a co-founder of Unity, says of the East metaphysically, he says, the East represents a willingness to open up to rich gifts of understanding, a reverent beginning of a journey of conscious expansion, fueled by an aspiration to become a wise one, moving forward through a promise of attaining a Christ awakening. I want to end today with the idea of the aspiration to become a wise one. I was a little bit saddened this week. I watched an interview on PBS with a young person, and the whole conversation was about what it is that they're looking for in college, higher education. And this young person was saying, I really need to, get through what I have to get through. I need to graduate. I need to get my graduate degree. And he's got it all planned out, because when I have that in my hand, then I'm going to be able to step into the job or the career. And I really appreciated the person conducting the interview, because they said, well, do you see college as just that, or do you see it as an opportunity to really expand yourself as an adult, as a human being? Basically, do you want to become a wise one? And the young person really had no desire to do that. And I would, as I look around the world today, for those of us who, I think that we have concerns about the world, we have concerns about our children, our grandchildren, we want the world to be a better place. I would really suggest that we listen to what Thich Nhat Hanh is trying to tell the world. What would Thich Nhat Hanh tell this young person? He might say, you know what? When you wake up, you got 24 hours to make what you want it to be, to wander a little bit, and to find whatever it is that turns you on. Have you ever asked yourself what your next journey is? I'm 50, I'm 60, I'm 70, I'm 80, I'm whatever, I'm 40. Have you ever asked yourself what the next journey is? And what's out there to turn you on? That lives in the eastern part of your consciousness? Where is your next migration going? What is going to start your next migration? Will you know it when it shows up? Are you willing to get turned on today? To have a buzz? To walk around with a stupid grin on your face? And you have no idea why? Because you found something? The East is such a wonderful, magical place. It's time, for us to grab a hold of the majesty and the mystery of magic again and see where it takes us. I'd appreciate it if you join me in prayerful consciousness. What I know right now, what my truth is that there is a magic in this universe. It is a power, it is an energy. And that power, that energy, that magic, that star has the capability of taking us wherever we want it to go. And I am so grateful for that passion. I am grateful for that shiny thing that comes along and grabs our imagination. Because imagination opens up ultimately to the great window into the soul. And I celebrate that in each and every one of us. I know today that this room is filled with that imagination. That this room is filled with all those new paths that we are being called to take. And in my gratitude for that, I let my word go, knowing that it's so, and so it is. All right.